Hello, tiny grasshoppers. Here we are again on another adventure. As you can see, I am not in Beans this time. I am actually in Greece. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to play the password game because I'm going to be on a bunch of different islands and it's going to be a little difficult for me to get around. I am on the island of Rhodes right now, and in this video, I'm going to give you a history of Greece, a very brief history, and some information on Rhodes because this is a pretty cool island and I kind of fell in love with it. So let's get into the history of Rhodes. So, throughout history, Rhodes has always been called Rhodes. It's been called Rhodes in a bunch of different languages, though. It was called Rhode in Italian, Rhodos in Turkish, and Rhodes in Ladino, which is kind of this Judeo Spanish, kind of old Spanish language that was spoken at one point in time. The name probably came from the Phoenician word for snakes because there were a ton of snakes on the island, and thank goodness I didn't see any of them because most of you guys know I'm petrified of snakes. Rhodes has an incredible climate, which means that it's sunny a lot of the time during the summer and it's kind of cool in the wintertime, which allows for some pretty neat things to grow on the island. We've got pine, cypress, both of those smell amazing. There's olives, lemons. I saw some tangerine trees and orange trees. People just grow them in their yard, which is kind of cool. You can just walk outside your door and pick a lemon if you need it. Just a final fun note about the island. I thought it was absolutely fascinating that there were so many cats around and not a ton of bugs. There were mosquitoes and things kind of like flying in the air, and there were spiders. I saw some spiders. But it is very clear that the stray cats that are on the island help with pest control and probably took care of the snake problem before. Now it's time to talk about the history of Rhodes and Greece. So, the history of Greece actually begins during the Neolithic period, which we're not going to go into too much right now because we've talked about it in different videos. But where things start to get interesting is during the Minoan period. The Minoan period took place mainly on Crete, which is a neighboring island to Rhodes. The Minoans were a group of people that were led by King Minos. Minos, Minotaur, Labyrinth. Sound a little familiar? Yeah, so these people were running around not actually speaking Greek. They were speaking something called Linear A, and their religion was goddess centric, which means that goddesses kind of ruled their religion. Overlapping this were the Mycenaeans, the Mycenaean era, and that was occurring on the peninsula of Greece, where Athens is. Now, bear in mind, Greece is actually an archipelago of about 3,000 islands. So, on the different islands, there's a little bit of time difference as far as who was living where when. Eventually, the Mycenaeans overtook the Minoans in Crete, and that changed the entire area and made the religion more gods and goddesses centered. Zeus became really super important during that time period. There was a leader named King Agamemnon, and he was famous for entering into the Trojan War, which again should sound pretty familiar at this point. Now, the Mycenaeans ended up dying out because there was a series of natural disasters, including a massive volcano that kind of wiped out the entire population and allowed for the introduction of what is called the Archaic Era. The Archaic Era had a massive increase in art, architecture, philosophy. There was the invention of the polis, which is a city state, and a city state can be compared to what it is the United States has, a bunch of different individual states that all kind of fall under federal rule. The overlapping time period that came next is called the Classical Period. That included famous philosophers like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, people that really influenced what we know of as science, philosophy, math, history. This was the time period when the development of democracy occurred, which really solidified the government for Greece. The problem was they didn't organize this democracy in a way that was highly communicative and kind of organized in a way that would last. And this is going to pop up again later. After this classical period came the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period is known for being the golden age of poetry. Remember when I said that the lack of communication in the development of their democracy was going to pop back up? Well, it did, because eventually Greece was taken over by Macedonia because all of these different polises couldn't get organized on how they wanted to fight back when they were invaded by Macedonia. During the Hellenistic period, a lot was going on in Greece. Stuff was happening from the east, stuff was happening from the west. There was a lot of changes taking place. In the east, Constantinople was being ruled by the Byzantine Empire, and that had a major effect on a lot of the islands that were towards the east of Greece. That includes Rhodes. To the west of Greece, the Romans were actually invading, and that introduced Christianity into the religion. So gods and goddesses kind of started to fade out a little bit, and Christianity started to take over. So keep in mind now, we got the Romans on the west, we got the Byzantines on the east, we've got gods and goddesses kind of fading out, Christianity coming in. Now get this. On the east, the Byzantine Empire was actually overtaken by the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople ended up falling and it became Istanbul. When that took place, Islam was introduced, and Islam was also introduced on Rhodes and in Greece during this time period. So while I was walking around, I actually saw Christian churches, Islamic temples, and the ruins from the different temples for the gods and goddesses. It was really neat and reminded me a lot of the United States, how when you can walk around and see all different types of religions being practiced. Anyway, so the Ottoman Empire started to push into Greece and try to take it over, and eventually they got fed up. They decided that they wanted independence. So they fought for independence and they were able to win. And the people in Rhodes decided they were too tired to fight and they didn't care about being under Ottoman rule. So they just remained there until the early 1900s. During the early 1900s, Italy came over and seized the island of Rhodes. Yeah, bonkers, right? The early 1900s, that's not that long ago. Now, the Italians are actually credited with going around the island of Rhodes and taking a bunch of historical landmarks and trying to rebuild them to make them places that people could go for museums or historical events. So, a lot of the places that I went to were actually rebuilt by the Italians, not by the Greeks. And in 1947, Rhodes finally became Greek again, which is crazy if you think about it, because that's so recent. Personally, I give Rhodes a 10 out of 10. First, because the cats that take care of the bug problems. Second, because the absolutely awesome weather. And third, because the history that bridges all the way up to 1947, which is practically modern day. And I think that that's bonkers and super cool. Now, that brings us to the end of our brief history of Greece and Rhodes. Hopefully you guys liked the video, and I will be seeing you guys in Crete next. Post below if you have any more questions about Rhodes. If you've got any ideas of what you want me to see in Crete, send me an email, post it below. I hope you guys are doing well and it's not too cold back in Buffalo. Talk to you soon. Bye.